everybody. Can everyone hear me at the back? I'm going to try and speak up, but if you can't hear me over there, can you just give me a wave? Okay, so Fiona's obviously given us an excellent summary of fatigue as a concept and some of the challenges of managing it in practice. I'm going to carry on with that theme and talk about how fatigue is managed in practice and two particular case studies of my research around this that I've done recently. Now, as we've mentioned before, there is a little bit of a mismatch between regulation and implementation. And as a PhD researcher who's kind of got a foot in both academia and industry, as we both have, I've seen that there is also a disconnect between theory and practice. And often we know that fatigue is an issue from a theoretical point of view, but actually implementing ways of managing that in practice is very difficult and it's often not really done, as we'll talk about later on. So, as Fiona's mentioned, the environmental factors that can contribute to fatigue are very important. And although we don't have an in-depth understanding of how these interact and how they can cause a fatigue reaction on a kind of day-to-day point of view, we do know from an intuitive sense that there are a lot of factors in marine-based industries that can contribute to fatigue. So we've got a combination of mental and physical tasks, often very heavy duty. We've got long working hours, working at night, obviously a very important factor for fatigue. Work-family conflict, people are away for long periods of time, there's a big emotional impact around that. An intense social environment, which Fiona's already mentioned, and also potential sleep disruption. Now, as we've already covered, sleep isn't the only factor that's important when we're discussing fatigue, but from what I would think, fatigue is almost a foundational point of fatigue. If you don't get your sleep right, it's very difficult to get anything else right. So let's have a look at the two case studies. The first case study that I'm going to talk about is some research that I conducted alongside ICHCA, I think I've got that right, Panos, into some research about how fatigue is currently managed in the port industry. Now, we know that fatigue is an issue in this industry, as we can see from the research up here. A study done in 2004 found that fatigue was a major contributing factor to 82% of the 66 recorded groundings and collisions. Now, obviously, this was quite a long time ago, and I wanted to understand how that kind of finding has impacted on current practice. So I did some research in collaboration with ICHCA, and in this we surveyed 29 organisations in the port industry just to get an overview of how fatigue is managed. Now, this wasn't an in-depth point of view, we didn't ask people on the ground. But often it's quite useful in the first instance to get a bit of a top-down understanding of how things are managed from that point, because obviously that has a big influence on how things are managed on the ground. So what we did is we sent out questionnaires via email to 29 organisations. That was done after an initial discussion with some of the organisations about what they felt fatigue, what they felt were some of the main things that influenced fatigue. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about the findings of that. Okay, so what we first looked into was some of the risk factors around fatigue. Now, obviously, there's a lot of environmental stresses here that we couldn't really touch upon in just an initial survey. But what you can touch upon is some of the general shift practices. Now, as I've mentioned, sleep is a foundation of fatigue, and linked to that is working hours. So if you don't get your working hours right, then it's very difficult to overcome the environmental stresses. So what we found here was that an average shift length had a tendency to be on the longer side. Obviously, long working hours, very linked to fatigue. And what was also really interesting was that 100% of organisations required employees to work during the night. Now, we all know that there's a lot of circadian disruption here. Working at night is linked to all sorts of really bad health consequences, let alone safety consequences. So that was a very interesting finding for us. Oh, sorry. Now, we thought that it would be important to ask about casual labour. And this kind of feeds into the things that you were saying about modern slavery, poor pay, things like that. Now this was added into the questionnaire after some initial discussions with the port organisations, who really flagged this up as a particular risk for fatigue. That you might be having workers who are working with one company for a 14-hour shift, and then going straight off to another company and working another 14-hour shift, potentially through the night. Obviously, this isn't good. And the finding that 60% of organisations use casual labour, 36% of those said that it was possible that these employees were working in other organisations. I think that's quite high, and I think that if this was eradicated, it would be a good step towards managing fatigue better. And personally, I was a little bit surprised that it hasn't already been taken care of and looked into a little bit more. So that was really interesting finding. Okay, so what we also wanted to know was whether organisations do undertake investigations into fatigue. And what we found was that 41% of organisations said that they had undertaken an investigation. However, most of these were conducted after an incident had already occurred. Now, what's really important in investigating incidents is that fatigue is taken into account as a potential cause of accidents. Because the problem is that sometimes incidents happen and fatigue isn't thought of as a potential cause, and then we don't learn from them. So it's good that this is taken into account, but what would be even better is if fatigue investigations took more of a preventative approach. So if they looked at the existing potential risks and use this as a way of preventing incidents from happening, that would be a much better trend. Fatigue management, so how is it actually managed, and what do the heads of organisations view fatigue management practices to be? So an interesting finding here was that over half of the organisations felt that fatigue has an impact on health and safety. Now my question to that would be, what do the others think? I think it's interesting looking at that research done back in 2004 and considering that 40% of organisations said that it doesn't have an effect on health and safety. But still good that 60 recognised it as a potential factor. And over half said that they did have a method for managing fatigue, which is positive, over half, good. But 80% said that this was done just through shift and overtime planning. And as Fiona's already mentioned, this is really just kind of something that should be done in a first instance and shouldn't be the whole picture of a fatigue management strategy. It's good to be taken into account, and it's, I would say, necessary to be taken into account when planning shifts and overtime, but other things need to also be taken into account in order to manage the risk effectively. Okay, so summary of findings. There was a lot of high-risk factors for fatigue here. In even the brief questionnaire that we undertook, we found quite a lot of risk factors. What we really need to do here is to conduct more research to have a deeper understanding of what's actually happening on the ground, how environmental factors come in, and how fatigue can be managed in a way that is compatible with the organisational demands. Because obviously what's preventing it from being managed effectively at the moment is those organisational demands. So we need to think of a way of doing that effectively. Yes, so basically we need more research, which is a very typical academic thing to say, I realise. Okay, so the second case study that I wanted to talk about today is actually some research that I'm conducting and Fiona's also conducting about how to actually implement a fatigue management programme. And this is based in the offshore wind industry. And this is actually probably most of the basis of my PhD work. And it's really exciting because what we've got here is a bit of a blank canvas. It's a new industry, well, it's a young industry. And there is hardly any research on fatigue. There's hardly any research or there's hardly any guidance. So we've got a real opportunity here to come in and look at how to create a bespoke management system. So what do we know about the offshore wind organisation? Well, we know that it's extreme. It's got working at heights, living offshore, and mental and physical stresses. So we know that there's a lot of environmental things there that can contribute to fatigue. And what's also interesting is that the industry themselves have identified fatigue as a factor, but have openly admitted that they don't really know how to address and manage it. So it's great that we can help them do that. So again, like with the port industry, we need to look at how to devise a fatigue management system alongside those many demands that are put on companies. Okay, so how am I going to address this? Now, I think it was really great that a lot of people have mentioned that in order to fully understand safety climate and safety culture, we need to talk to the people who are actually working on the ground. And this is what I'm going to do, or this is what I'm in the process of already doing. I am conducting interviews with technicians and seeing what they perceive fatigue to be, seeing what they perceive the occupational stresses to be, and seeing how this affects them. From this, I'm going to be doing a diary study. Now, this is going to be interesting because what I'm going to be asking technicians to do is fill in a little survey twice a day over the course of a month, in which they basically assess their own fatigue. They assess the sleep quality and they assess all the different factors that could have contributed to their fatigue that day. And we're also doing a sleep analysis. So we're actually getting them to wear actigraphs and understanding how their sleep quality and quantity changes over that course of time. And what this can really do is help us to map fatigue and map how it progresses, map how it changes over the course of a shift, and to look at how all the factors surrounding fatigue impact on this. Something I'm really excited about. And then stage 3 will hopefully be an intervention. Now, I don't purport for this to be a solution, and we don't need to look into fatigue anymore, but it's going to be some suggestions of how fatigue can be effectively managed. And as a prediction right now, it's probably going to involve incorporating fatigue into an existing safety culture, which I'll talk about a bit more now. So I have got some preliminary findings because I'm nearly finished with my interview study. So I wanted to talk about some of the interesting things that came out about that. Particularly interesting for safety culture is that there's a really good just culture in this organisation that I'm currently investigating. Or investigating, that sounds a bit sinister. I'm currently researching with. There's a really good just culture already there. People aren't afraid to report near misses. People aren't afraid to report safety problems. They have a very open discussion around that kind of thing. Where the just culture isn't there is around fatigue and around other mental health related issues. There's a very big stigma surrounding fatigue. People are afraid of being seen as lazy. People are afraid of letting their team down if they report feeling incapable of doing certain work, if they report feeling under the weather or even a bit down. So fatigue isn't incorporated into the just culture, and anything that we can do to encourage that to be included would be a really positive step. Because the problem with this is that people are often not reporting their fatigue until really late. So they don't report fatigue until they actually physically can't do the job anymore. Whereas if it was reported earlier, then there could be minor adjustments made and things could be a lot smoother. Obviously, as we keep saying, there are many factors in this environment that contributed to fatigue. Lots of environmental stresses. Actually, a really interesting thing that came out of the interviews was that it was the relations between colleagues. That was a massive factor into how people felt on a daily basis. And also an interesting thing, which supports the need for a bespoke model, is that fatigue occurred very differently depending on even the type of offshore role that people had. So whether they were technicians who lived on a boat for a period of 2 weeks, or whether they were technicians who sailed into work every day, fatigue was experienced differently and there were different challenges in each role. Overall recommendations for both. Obviously, both industries would benefit from incorporating fatigue into an existing safety culture. Again, an academic's answer, further research is needed to understand fatigue, as obviously it's a very complex issue. But I'm just glad that I'm able to just contribute in some way towards furthering our understanding and knowledge of this. And we need a bespoke approach. We need to ask the people on the ground what's happening, and we need to have some kind of model that's flexible and that we can kind of adjust depending on the environment. And one of the biggest things that I think that fatigue management systems need to do in order to work alongside operational demands is to foster an open culture where people can say to each other, I'm not feeling well today, I'm not feeling up to it today. Because if you have an open culture, then it can work alongside those very heavy operational demands. I wanted to end on this because I think from my research I found a little bit of a misconception that fatigue either is there or isn't there in organisations. Do we have fatigue? Well, everybody has fatigue. So it can't be eradicated completely, but like any health and safety risk, it can be managed effectively, and that's what we're trying to help do.